This is The Blockchain Show. The Blockchain Show is a podcast that demystifies and promotes widespread adoption of cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology. You're listening to episode number 62. This week on the show, Steve returns, and he interviews Shaun Conway and Anne Connelly of ixo. ixo has an application called Amply in partnership with UNICEF that's being used in preschools across South Africa to help increase access to education subsidies for disadvantaged children.
I want to thank you both for coming on the show. I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself then, and we'll get started with the show.
Thank you, Steve. My name is Shaun Conway. I started my career out as a physician in South Africa, and have had a career in international development and international health, which really kind of catapulted off at the start of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, which was around about, it was in the sort of late 90s, when we realized that there was this hugely exponential epidemic that was about to hit our continent, and particularly our country, which would infect more than a third of the adult population. And so this was a huge wake-up call early on in my career, and I started then to look at how I could get involved in the response to this. And that's taken me down a very sort of interesting path of looking at different data-driven and technology-driven ways in which to create responses to public health threats, to issues around access to medicines, availability of health workers, medicines, pricing, transparency, and all these kinds of things. And later on, after a number of years working in the sector, I got very involved in aid transparency and accountability. So kind of looking at what kind of results we're achieving with all of the money that goes into the aid sector, whether it's spent by international aid organizations or by national governments or even by the private sector. And so that really sparked off a journey of inquiry into the kind of data technologies and the ways in which we could capture information that would potentially change how the world works in terms of bringing resources to bear and to meet needs really in society. And I can talk a bit more about that later.
Great, thanks. And Anne, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Anne Connelly, and I like to say my pre-blockchain career was in humanitarian aid. And so I worked for a number of years with Doctors Without Borders and another organization called Dignitas International that was very focused on sustainable development in the health space. And I think what got me so excited about blockchain and the applications in that sector was just its ability to absolutely transform the lives of the people that I had been trying to help for so long. And so I've been in the blockchain space since about 2012 and have worked for a number of companies. I was very lucky to be from Toronto, which has an absolutely incredible blockchain community there. And so I've been very focused on any type of cryptocurrency or blockchain application in developing contexts, which is what gets me so excited about the work that ixo is doing currently in South Africa and soon to be around the rest of the world.
Great. I actually met you at Consensus 2017 in New York, where you worked on the Swiss Re project. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a part of the Consensus Hackathon. And one of the challenges was in and around trying to sell insurance to smallholder farmers in Kenya. And so we really looked at how you could use data sources like NASA satellite data and smart contracts to enable these smallholder farmers to access insurance to protect themselves using blockchain technology. So it was a really exciting project to be working on, just looking at how blockchain can impact the lives of people who have poor access to traditional types of support systems like insurance. So we were very lucky. We tied for first place, and Swiss Re is currently looking at some of the mechanisms behind smart contracts and that to employ in the field.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting project. I had heard that a lot of these farmers are unable to do what they do best, which is farming, because there's a huge amount of risk involved, and so they switch to like less profitable and perhaps less sustainable ventures like raising animals as opposed to farming. instead. So if you can find a way to help them get insurance, which is something that traditional insurers don't. There's not a good market there, not a good market fit. But if you can bridge that gap, then you can incentivize to continue their practices of farming.
Absolutely. And this is where, if we can employ some of the latest technologies that are out there to try to bring access to some of these benefits that we've had for so long to a lot of new communities, then the benefits for them can be significant.
And so, Shaun, you were saying that you were a medical doctor. Did I understand that?
Yeah, that's right.
And you got into this in the early AIDS crisis?
Yeah, so a lot of what we were doing was really tracking data, trying to find information about where the epidemic was taking place, who were the vulnerable populations, who was infected. Because once you understand, you have a picture of that, you can use the information to have epidemic responses. That's a typical way of dealing with epidemics. If you're, for instance, an infectious disease physician, is that firstly you get all the information and then you can respond. Now with the HIV epidemic, it was very different because people didn't want to disclose and they didn't want to get tested, and so the access to data and the availability of data was really challenging, and this was one of the things that I think really slowed down the response. And then in the later years, when the global response had really started to take hold, and there were literally billions of dollars pouring into AIDS relief and responding to the epidemic, then you had questions being asked about whether this aid and whether the money that was being spent, and huge amounts being spent on pharmaceuticals, because later on in the response it became possible to manage HIV, and AIDS was no longer a death sentence because of antiretrovirals, but hugely expensive medicines. And so huge money going into the medicines and into increasing the supply of health workers and so on. And lots of questions then being asked around how effectively this money was being spent and what kind of results were being achieved. And so particularly around 2008, which I guess was a crossroads for the world, and when we had the financial crisis, but we also had really, I guess, the birth of the blockchain idea. There was a shift in thinking within the development sector around funding international development, including everything from AIDS response to all of the poverty reduction programs and humanitarian relief efforts and so on. Really with countries saying, well, hold on, our economies are not doing so well. Maybe we should be funding less, or certainly we need to be looking at funding better. And so there were initiatives, and I got involved in some of these, to try and make aid more effective, make sure that the money gets better spent. But in order to do that, you need to have really good data. So for a number of years, I got to design and run an international accountability initiative called the International Health Partnership Plus Results. And this was meant to be a data-driven accountability initiative where we would go through the UN system and with countries who had all signed up to this global agreement to be held accountable, and collect data and then use the data to feed back and see what was working and what's not working. And what I realized through my years of running this program was just really how poor the data is and was. And I don't think it's changed hugely. And so this really then became a mission of mine to look at how we can better use the data and how we can link the data better data that we can get, and how we can link that to funding. And this is really sort of the seed of the idea of what has become ixo.
Do you have a background in data science as well? It seems to be, you've been working at the forefront of two really nascent technologies like data science and blockchain. And with ixo, you kind of bring those two together, as well as what got you interested in data science? Is it just the only method that was available or the best method that helps out doctors in these humanitarian aid situations? Or did you have an interest in it before that?
Yeah, I guess there's partly a sort of very personal story around this, which is, I grew up in apartheid South Africa, where we were isolated from the rest of the world, and it was obviously pre-internet days as well. So can you imagine that?
Yeah.
And
you don't look that old in your picture, I'll tell you that much.
And I remember, I guess I got it out of a magazine that I'd been reading. I had a little piece of paper cut out, which was a quote that I found in a magazine, which was a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a philosopher. And the quote is, "Knowledge is power." And it became a sort of dictum of my life as a sort of a young boy, because I really felt trapped by the circumstances that we were living in at the time. As being somebody who always questioned and wanted to have answers to things, and we were really living under sort of horrendous situation where it just didn't make sense to me. So I truly believed, that this was a powerful idea, that information is power, and that you could really do amazing things with information. And so that got me interested, in the information side of it, which is, I think, more interesting than the data side of it. For most people, they understand information, and it's more geeky people who understand data. And then later on in my studies and in my postgraduate studies, I had the fortune to do a course at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine when I was studying my doctorate in public health, and this was on decision analysis, and it completely changed my worldview, and had a very unconventional lecturer who was really a Bayesian, I guess, so I got exposed to Bayes' theorem and ideas around how you can use sort of completely different statistical thinking to frame your understanding of the world, but it needs to be informed by data. And so I'm not a data scientist, but I guess I'm a data believer, a data technologist.
Yeah, for those who don't know about Bayesian inference or Bayesian theorem, it's kind of like, if I were to put it in layman's term, if you have two conflicting viewpoints, the answer is someplace in the middle, and the Bayesian inference is how the probability of each one. So that's what we use to determine how likely some scenario is. Is that a pretty good explanation? Or is there a better one?
Yeah, it's really about statistical inference, and it's about priors. So based on the information that we already know, given new information, how does that change our view? And it has an incrementalist approach rather than a fundamentalist approach. It's not black and white. It says that on day one, when the cave dweller came out, the first inhabitants of the earth came out of his cave, and he saw the sun. He had to wonder, will I ever see this thing again? And pretty much he had a 50-50 chance. Day two, when he saw it again, that probability that he would see the sun again sort of became slightly more probable, but not definite. But over time, the probability builds up to being, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm going to see the sun tomorrow. That was before the asteroid hit. So that's great theory. But the other idea that was quite central to my thesis proposal was around the idea of stigmergic collaboration, which is around kind of wisdom of the crowds, but not not in the sort of crowd think kind of way. What it's really about is how incrementally we add to decisions. We can add to decisions when we tap into the knowledge of a crowd, and how that builds up really a greater understanding or greater truth than just the opinions of a few wise men. And so this was really the basis for my thesis. And what's been really interesting to see, particularly more recently, is how blockchain technologies and more kind of, I guess, just ways of coordinating decentralized inputs are being used in prediction markets, and now the idea of token curated registries and many other very exciting applications where you can really get this collaboration around finding the truth, or sorting out the the true from the untrue, and putting a stake on it and participating and being incentivized to contribute to how decisions get made.
Yeah, it seems one of the transformative natures of blockchain is being able to, separate fact from fiction. There has to be, some sort of audit trail and some sort of accountability. You can put information in the blockchain and there's no guarantee that it's going to, be accurate information. But if you have an audit trail and some way to, penalize those people who put in misinformation, then you can have a pretty solid method for separating fact from fiction, I think, anyways.
I think in the early days of blockchain technology, there was this kind of simple idea that, this now makes everything transparent and a permanent record, and therefore we can trust it more. And I think that simplistic view, I think has been kind of dispelled, because you can put untruths into the blockchain, and that will also be transparent and so on. But I think what's become more interesting in this space is the understanding of how crypto economics play out. So if you've got skin in the game, if you've got a stake, if you've got something to lose, and there's some impartiality around whether you lose it. So in other words, the blockchain doesn't take sides. Smart contracts don't take sides. They bring a statistical decision and execute based on a rule set that then would either penalize you or reward you, and that's crypto economics. And this is enabling us to take the default position that everybody is an adversary. So don't trust anyone, don't believe anyone, and then let the system play out.
Yeah. And you maybe want to jump in here and talk a little bit about ixo and how you got to see blockchain's capabilities in order to do what ixo wants to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all my experience in the sustainable development space, two of the biggest issues that I saw was that there wasn't enough money to solve all of the problems that we wanted to solve. And we weren't doing a good enough job of using the money that we actually had. And for myself, what I really feel is that at the core of both of these issues is a lack of access to quality data and high resolution data. And this is really where ixo comes in. And essentially what we're doing is building a protocol that enables anyone in the sustainable development space to create proof of impact around the work that they're doing. And then this proof can enable them to access social impact bonds, impact investments, which is going to drive more money into the space. But what's really exciting about it is all of the data that's associated with that proof becomes a part of an open data commons or a global impact ledger. And this enables people working in the space, whether it's governments, researchers, organizations, to use this data to make more informed decisions about the work that they're doing, meaning that we're going to be able to achieve so much more than we ever have been able to in the past, because we're suddenly no longer working in these silos. And that gets me so excited about all of this, is that, with this access to high quality, high resolution data, we can actually start creating exponential change in the problems that we're trying to solve out there in a lot of these developing contexts, and even in non-developing contexts. When you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, it touches on everything from water to gender equality, and it's not just about helping countries overseas. It's about tackling these types of issues everywhere in the world, whether it's in the United States or in the middle of Central African Republic. And so that's where ixo is truly transforming the way that sustainable development is funded and measured and delivered. And it's really about how do you actually count what matters in this world. And so this is where I really feel like ixo is the solution to a lot of the problems that we're seeing in this development sector.
Could you maybe touch a little bit on what would be the first problems that ixo might tackle, and then larger scale, what's like the biggest issue that ixo has a chance to help fix? Is it just the data availability, making the data available, having these proof of what's the term you use? Proof of
Proof of impact.
Proof of impact. So a proof of impact, is that like somebody built a well and then a verifier goes out there and says like, oh, I verified that this well was built? And
yeah,
then...
so the whole system is really based on verifiable claims. And so essentially the way it works is that you can say, okay, I claim that I taught 100 children or I planted 1 million trees, whatever it is. And then that claim is evaluated by either, as you say, an evaluator, a human that goes and verifies it, or ideally by a data source or multiple data sources, or by a crowd of people that have witnessed this. And so what it enables you to do is to essentially set the evaluation parameters for yourself. So if you're, say, an impact investment group, and for you it's good enough if the teacher says, oh, I taught 10 kids showed up today, and that's a high enough quality of proof for you, then that's all right. For another group, it might be that they want to see the fingerprints of the kids in a phone every morning. And so it enables this incredible amount of flexibility around how these claims are essentially verified and evaluated. And then once that happens, these verified impact claims can essentially trigger payments, or they're tokenized. And so this leads to a whole other impact economy that we've never seen before, enabling these secondary sets of trading of these impact type tokens. So things like carbon credits, health credits. That's really going to take a look at how we value and what we value in the world around us in a way that we never have before.
I was taken by a statement that Vinay Gupta made on a different podcast. There's a different podcast out there where there's these idiot hosts, and they call themselves that. So and they said, oh, and you really want to save the world. And he's like, of course I am. What's the point of getting up in the morning if you're not? And it really resonated with me that that I don't know where I'm going with this.
Well, no, but I agree with you. I mean, when I got into the blockchain space back in 2012, I mean, people at meetups were there because they wanted to change the world. They wanted to have an impact. They weren't there to make money. They weren't there to build the next Google. They were there because they wanted to change the way the world worked and the way it ran, and the type of equality for people who hadn't had that equality before. And so I think, like, when I look at what we're doing here, the sector has obviously grown and more people have come into it, and there's, banking apps and insurance apps and what have you. But when you look back at why you got into the space, it wasn't to build an app for a bank. It was really to make a difference. And using the protocol, this is a way that you can not only have a difference, but track the difference that you're making, and share that impact with the world.
Shaun, what do you think the biggest impact would be of ixo, or one of the most immediate impacts that'll be seen from it?
So I guess there's two answers to that. The first is really the impact that we hope to have on how impact is measured. So the adoption of these standards, and there's a really good opportunity that this would happen, because we've based the design of the protocol on new Web3 standards, so decentralized web standards. So it's not all just about blockchain; it's also about data structures, it's about linked data, it's about digital identifiers for the web, and it's about this standard of verifiable claims, which uses applied cryptography to assure and authenticate and verify information that is linked to an identified entity. And so these are really core internet standards that are currently going through the W3C standard setting process that will hopefully become, we expect quite soon, core internet standards. Now, if they're applied to the development sector, if we're able to lead the way and get more organizations to adopt these standards, it will have a massive transformative effect on what can then be done with the data in terms of interoperability and in terms of data sharing and the kind of applications that Anne has spoken about. The second part of this is then looking at kind of where this is actually going to be implemented and what kind of direct impacts we're going to see. Now, in that regard, the ixo is an enabler for other organizations to be able to build use cases and applications on the protocol. And in order to bootstrap that and to kind of get it going, we have a number of partnerships, and we also have an existing set of activities that we've been implementing over the past year or so in South Africa. So this has really been in the context of early childhood development, which is a very high priority, and it's also an area in which the investment returns on development have been proven to be very high, because if you're intervening early on in a person's life, this has massive impacts long term. It has a compounding positive effect throughout their life, and it also compounds positive impacts within communities and within economies. So there's a huge push to invest in the first 5 years of children's lives, and so we've been focusing on applications in that area. Across other sectors, we've got partnerships, for instance, with the Gold Standard Foundation, the Carbon Certification Foundation that's been doing carbon certification and the issuance of carbon credits for the past decade or more. And we're working with them to implement reference demonstrations of how we can generate impact credits that would enable the increased investment in clean burning cook stoves. Now, this might sound like a pretty obvious thing, that clean burning cook stoves, everyone should have one. But in fact, there are billions of people around the planet who still heat and cook in their homes, basically burning trees and generating black carbon and generating a lot of toxic fumes that cause a number of children to die every year and cause a lot of respiratory illness. So that is another example of where we're applying the protocol, in a particular use case. There, where the claims are being made by the cook stove. So we have an IoT device that is issuing its own claims about its use and about the air quality around the device. So it provides us with a really interesting reference implementation use case that hopefully inspires others to take on similar projects. And then we're in discussion with a whole range of other organizations who are already formally partnered with the ixo.Foundation or who are wanting to implement projects using the protocol.
What do you think the amount of carbon that's released by these non-clean cook stoves worldwide that could be captured, or could be captured isn't the right word, but not released into the atmosphere with upgrade to clean cooktops?
I can't answer that without doing a quick Google. But there was a great National Geographic article about this, a feature article about this last year, which has got stunning photographs, as National Geographic does. But it really kind of got into people's homes and into communities and investigated this and sort of really showed the scope of the problem, not only in terms of the black carbon that's produced, but also the detrimental effects this has on the environment surrounding the places where people live and they cook in this way, because of the decimation of forests and then of course the health impacts on kids, particularly in respiratory disease. The flip side of this is that when you do implement this Clean Cook Stoves program, it creates employment opportunities, particularly for women in these communities who become cook stoves promoters. And so you begin to instill a whole new network of agents who are able to promote cook stoves, and then the next thing, other health interventions and other products and so on. And so this is really creating a distribution network within communities for all kinds of other technologies that will have a positive impact.
So it seems like, would somebody who implemented this get proof of impact credits for under 5 for carbon credit and for putting women to work in developing nations? Would they get like 3 separate credits? Because it seems like it's a very diverse, or has impacts that affect a wide range of things, or at least 3 out the top of your head.
Exactly, that's right. So what has happened historically with the Cook Stoves initiative, and there's a global Cook Stove Alliance which is a massive partnership initiative, and it has the World Bank and a whole range of other partners who have been promoting cook stoves. But primarily, the impact that has been generated out of these programs has focused on carbon credits, with the health benefits just really being an ancillary benefit. Now, with us being able to create measures of health benefits and of employment benefits by capturing data in a way that it can become tokenized as a digital asset, it becomes much more feasible to trade those benefits as well. And of course, trading any sort of token or any sort of asset requires a marketplace. And there are marketplaces for this, so there are people who are interested in generating economic opportunities for poor women. There are people who are interested, organizations that are interested in the health benefits. And then, of course, there's the huge drive around climate change and carbon trading. And so this provides multiple potential investment streams into these communities that can come off just one sort of intervention. So really, I think this shows how by having multiple impacts and by contributing to generating multiple forms of capital, this is really building up a much bigger impact economy than how these things have been approached previously.
Definitely interesting. I can see the potential of ixo, and I'm really happy that there's somebody out there doing it, because it's definitely needed, and I don't think that there's anything like it out there now. And without blockchain technology, I don't think it would be really possible to do that. There's for things like carbon credits, there's so much of an incentive for like nations to cheat or companies to cheat. If you can't like have a global ledger, a single source of truth that's not owned by any one government or any one nation, that's like a global ledger. That's all.
So this is the way I sort of try and explain this to my friends who aren't technically minded, is comparing the difference between high definition data and low definition data, or low definition programming and high definition programming. We all want to have high definition televisions, ultra high definition televisions, and so on. We don't like the low definition stuff. And really, definition for us in data is about two things. It's about, firstly, resolution. So high resolution data resolves to unique identifiers. Now, this wasn't possible until actually fairly recently, to be able to have unique identifiers that are globally accessible and can globally be authenticated. With identity blockchains or identifiers placed on blockchains using the decentralized identifier standard, which we've been involved in helping to develop, we have an identity layer for the internet, and we have the ability to take those identifiers and bake them into claims, and therefore to get high resolution of the data. The second part of high definition is high fidelity, and fidelity has really two aspects to it, in my view. The one is the trust. Do you trust this data? Has it been altered? Is its provenance good? And here with cryptography, with hashing and with signing and so on, we have data that from its source is formulated in a high fidelity data format, which is really cool. And the other part of it is this replicable? If I go out and I do the same intervention over and over again, and I start to do it at scale, so replicability at scale, particularly through these decentralized networks, is really hard to get. But with data formatted in this way, you get scalability with fidelity. And so there together, high definition is high resolution plus high fidelity.
Very cool, very cool. I think you were talking about digital identities. I want to kind of go back to that. What is this digital data unique identifiers, this standard that you helped create, and what was your role in helping create that?
Yeah, so when we started off implementing our proof of concept of this, we got an innovation grant from an innovation fund in South Africa, and they said that could you use this protocol that you've been talking about to manage a government subsidy scheme which provides daily attendance subsidies for children attending preschools in South Africa. So it's a fairly small amount of money, but it involves the service providers having to write paper claims and submit those claims, and it's hugely problematic in terms of administration, and also a lot of falsified claims get submitted and big problems with the administration. And so we said, okay, cool, let's sort of set off and do that. And so we started building, and we thought, okay, the first thing is we need to identify everyone. We would identify the claimants or the service providers. We need to identify the beneficiaries. And so the question was, well, what identifiers do we use? Do we use the South African national ID number? And most of the kids don't have that ID number. And so this kind of led us down a path of looking at the potential of just using a UUID, a universal unique identifier, which is it's a commonly sort of used thing within computing. And so we thought, well, if we could take this UUID and we could insert it into a registry, into a database, and if that database happened to be a blockchain, that would be pretty cool. And so we decided to try that out, and we built an integration into, wait for it, the Ripple ledger, because at the time this was pre-Ethereum.
Ripple.
Yeah, it was pre-Ethereum, and we said, well, we've got a choice between Bitcoin or Ripple, and at the horrendous price that Bitcoin was then, $1 a Bitcoin or whatever it was, we just thought, you know what, it's going to be really too expensive for us to scale this up to thousands and thousands of children and service providers. I mean, we were looking at really having to create identifiers for something like 800,000 children plus 100,000 service providers. So we would have been spamming the blockchain. I mean, basically, we would have been locked out of Bitcoin, and also would just not have been able to afford the fees. And that was back in a long time ago, 2015, which seems like an eon away. And so we decided to go the Ripple route, and that's kind of how we ventured into the digital identifier space. And it was only a year or so later, no, it was later in that year, when I came across the Rebooting Web of Trust community. Now, this has got some of the leading technologists, Christopher Allen, Marnus Burney, Vitalik was involved in the first meeting, who had started to look at identifiers and the blockchain, and got involved in that community, and it's really a great community. We have 6 monthly workshops, which are a bit like hackathons, and really kind of work out what are the standards going to be. And so this original idea of putting UUIDs onto a blockchain record has evolved into what's called the DID standard, the Decentralized Identifier Standard, which is now going through W3C. And it's pretty much the same. It's the same concept. It's really a universally unique identifier that is placed into a blockchain record, ideally by the person who's wanting to use it to identify themselves. So this becomes a key or an identity, the start of an identity that is owned by the individual. And so this opened up.
Is it fully self-sovereign, or?
It's self-sovereign. Yeah, that was the birth of self-sovereign. So we through that Rebooting Web of Trust meeting workshop, we came up with this concept of self-sovereign identity.
Definitely interesting stuff. Is there any risks to self-sovereign identity? Do you see any sort of downfalls with any sort of problems that might arise with self-sovereign identity? Yeah,
like all of these technologies, it's treacherous territory if it's not done right. So there's great good potential and there's great bad potential with these technologies. So, for instance, in the early days, some of the companies working in this space, thought it would just be okay to hash personal data and put hashes of personal data on the blockchain, or even to put personal data directly onto the blockchain record, and it's there forever. Fortunately, the whole kind of science and more than science, sort of in the community around identity, which is a political issue, and
sociological issue and it's an anthropological issue. It is a very, very vibrant community that's been looking at issues around of identity for a long time. And so what we've seen is a really interesting meeting of minds around the technologies and around the ideologies of identities. And this has hugely helped the kind of direction of travel of how the standards have evolved around digital identifiers. And so now we have some very cool technological solutions to some of the very important problems. So, for instance, the right to be forgotten, or identifiers being used to track you around all of the kind of digital activities that you do. So this is a very exciting space to be working in because it's solving really some of the core questions that have been identified as problems for many, many years around identity.
Could you make a case that the one of the true innovations of blockchain isn't necessarily providing banking services to the unbanked, but to actually providing identity services to those who don't have them? Well, is that a bigger deal, or?
Well, so if you really kind of distill it down to very first principles, banking transactions are really transfers of information between one identified counterparty and another identified counterparty. What's important is that there are two counterparties and that they are both identified. Now, with banking regulations and anti-money laundering and so on, the amount of identification that you need to do for those counterparties has become quite high, because you need to have KYC and legal identity, particularly with transactions over a certain value, in order to comply with banking regulations. So really, without identity and without identifiers and without the capability of making transactions, passing data from one to the other, you don't have modern banking.
So you were saying in 2015 you used the Ripple ledger to start. Is it still using Ripple? Is that still the chain that you use for these digital identities?
Oh no, not at all. No. So we started using Ethereum once Ethereum became available, became stable enough to start playing with. We still use a privately hosted Ethereum network, just as I believe Uport does, simply because right now the fees on the Ripple public network on the mainnet are just too high to be doing most of the transactions around identity, particularly at the kind of scale that we need to do them. And so, although we've done most of our development on Ethereum, we have been looking at other blockchains. We've also been working with Sovereign, and are the first sovereign node in Africa. We're one of the founding stewards of the Sovereign network, and we're very excited about the potential that the Sovereign blockchain offers as an identity purpose-specific blockchain.
No, could you tell me a little bit more? Sovereign, I haven't heard of that one. Is that Uport, or what's Sovereign?
No, Sovereign is it's a new blockchain which is now part of the Hyperledger project. It's now called, it's been rebranded as Indy within Hyperledger, right. And this is purpose-specific, designed to provide an identifier blockchain, and it has some pretty cool features. So we work quite closely with the team that has developed Sovereign, and as I said, we're hosting one of the nodes and so on, and we're quite excited about the way in which Sovereign implements identifiers, because it addresses a lot of the problems that I alluded to earlier. So, for instance, privacy and the right to be forgotten, and many other features.
So you seem to be, you're very technologically agnostic. You went from Ripple to a public Ethereum to private Ethereum, and now to Sovereign. How do you keep up with that? We were talking before I started recording about the dizzying pace of how things change. You mentioned 2015 is when you know, so long ago in 2015, and you know it's 2 years ago, 3 years ago. How do you keep up with how fast things change? How much the space is exploding?
Yeah, so in a number of ways, you know, so I think that regardless of what new technologies people come up with, they need to socialize those technologies within communities. And you know what we find, what I've found is that the community is a relatively kind of knowable community. You know, if you go to the conferences and you go to meetups and you go to the design workshops and so on, you tend to meet the same people over and over again. And anybody who comes along with a really sort of new idea and wants to get that idea into the mainstream really needs to interact with the community. And so if you're participating in community activities, you know, including online and then attending conferences and things like that, you do tend to kind of pick up on some of the main trends and some of the important conversations that are going on, you know, about the new technologies and the pros and cons of the new technologies. But I think fundamentally it's really about just having an incredibly inquiring mind and just being really fascinated and interested. I mean, as a doctor, I mean, I never would have thought of myself being involved in something called blockchain. And here I am, and I think that most people find that once they start to delve into this, it's a bit of a rabbit warren, but you do become hooked, and you become fascinated by it, and you want to know more. The danger is, of course, the evil allure of the cryptocurrency, and the other side of what blockchain technologies are all about, and the distraction of kind of getting involved in and obsessed about crypto prices and trading cryptocurrencies and so on. But anyway, that's possibly for another conversation.
I would find that conversation interesting. I struggle with how much the space has changed from you know, being about making the world a better place to enriching people who are already very rich to begin with. You know, the Bitcoin network, probably one of the earliest, the first blockchain, is completely useless now for most of the world. The transaction fees are more than, you know, a week's salary or something for one transaction. It's ridiculous what that particular blockchain has turned into. And I think the space is a lot of the hype is about just how much money can be made or you know, lost in the space, and I find it troubling.
Yeah, I think the culture around the space is going to change over time, and the more people that you get into it, people have different interests and you know, different goals that they want to achieve with the technology. You know, I always joke when I talk to people that you can qualify members of the community based on what year they got into the, you know, the blockchain space. And the early players, you'll get crypto anarchists, libertarians. From there, it's more about people in the technology after that. And then, you know, anyone coming in sort of 2017, 2018, there's how do I get the 100x returns that my friend had? But I think, you know, as the space changes, and you're going to see all this money that's around and is even here now, I think people are going to go back to their roots, you know, and say, well, I have more money than I could ever spend in a lifetime or even my children's lifetime. What do I actually want to achieve in my life? And so what I'm seeing with a lot of the, you know, crypto billionaires out there is that they're trying to really achieve this self-actualization through the technology, whether it's by supporting projects that are truly transformative or, you know, trying to have an impact on the life of another single individual. And I think that's what's so exciting about ixo is we really are, you know, the protocol that enables you to achieve the impact that you want to have in the world.
Yeah, I think that we do need to have some strange attractors, you know. So it's a complex world, and new patterns emerge that we don't identify early on. You know, one of the characteristics of complexity is the emergence of of patterns and trends that seem to come from nowhere, and the convergence around what are called strange attractors. And sometimes these strange attractors are things that are completely strange. We had no idea. Why would people really become obsessed by CryptoKitties? Like, that's weird. But it creates a whole community and a whole sort of frenzy. And I hope that what we are developing with ixo is a strange attractor. It's an idea that is appealing to people. The responses we're getting in talking to people and people coming through to us is, it's like, you guys are doing something really cool. I don't necessarily fully understand it, but it's something I want to learn more about, and I want to know more about. And I would really hope that regardless of where we get to with the core technology and sort of more of the technical aspects of this, that we really are able to help to contribute towards an aspiration, and an aspiration that's focused beyond the current economy, beyond the current world that we live in, the terrible politics, the fake news, and so on. And that we can inspire people to look beyond that and to say, you know what, 2030 is not that far off. There is this set of goals that have been committed to, these very audacious, very big global goals, but they're not a pipe dream. They've been rigorously established, through consensus processes and through lots of political processes and everything. And so you have these sustainable development goals. The time frame is short, and the environment, the context within which they exist, is real. We know that there's climate change. We know that there are huge social unrest problems, political problems, etc. And therefore, we need a way through. So I'm hoping that at least we can contribute in some small or big way towards creating a new kind of aspiration.
Do you want to back up and go over this 2030 number? Who did that come from, and what are the goals that you're trying to accomplish by 2030?
Right. So there's a global development agenda, which in the previous iteration was called the Millennium Development Goals. Now, the development agenda is set by the UN. So the UN being the sort of global governance mechanism for all countries and related agencies and so on, to participate in global issues that go beyond national boundaries and that kind of affect all countries. And so the Millennium Development Goals were a very powerful set of goals that organized people, that focused the agenda, prioritized what countries do, what organizations do, and where the money flows. And they were focused on, those goals were focused on poor countries. And so it was focused on health, sort of infectious diseases, HIV, TB, and malaria. It was focused on maternal health, child health, and so on. It was focused on education, really issues that were most pressing in the developing world. So what people previously called the third world. And what we saw happen over the period that those goals were in place were massive improvements in reduction in child mortality, decrease in absolute poverty levels. If you look at the charts for most of the goals, they really achieved huge gains against what was targeted. So those goals came to an end in 2015. And in negotiating the goals for the next phase, for the next 15 years, it starts with a kind of gap analysis, or looking at the state of the world and what are the problems that we face as a world, and how do we address those? And the realization amongst the UN community was that it's no longer a matter of rich and poor countries, that the issues that face us all, including resource depletion, including climate change, including political instability, including even in rich countries, inequalities which lead to high mortality rates amongst young children, in the wealthiest country in the world, in the US. Why does that exist? And so these are not problems just of rich world or poor world or first world or third world. These are problems that face us all. And so the Sustainable Development Goals are 17 goals that range across from health, education, all the way through to life above land, life underwater, climate change, equality, and they're all sort of interlinked, and they provide an organizing framework, a set of priorities with measures and accountability and reporting mechanisms that focus the attention of the world on achieving some very specific impacts. And so that's the framework within which ixo is operating. And it provides very concrete measures. It provides very concrete ways in which the UN comes together annually through their annual meetings. They review the progress against those goals, and they take action where the goals are not being met. So there's projected gains that are meant to be achieved. And if those gains are off track, then there'll be corrective measures made. Now, that's all very great, except for the fact that these goals are hugely ambitious and they require a huge amount of resourcing. So there should be at least $3 trillion a year going directly into the accomplishment of these goals. And currently, the established ways of funding development through official development assistance, or what we call aid, and through government funding and through different organizations, it comes to around $1.3 trillion a year. And so we're quite short from the target of 3 trillion. But I'm very optimistic that what we're seeing is a shift in how capital is allocated, including by fund managers, pension fund managers, sovereign wealth fund managers, seeing that, that they really need to shift where the money is invested. And more recently, we've seen, countries even saying that they're not going to invest in oil stocks. They're moving away from petrochemicals and they're moving into green energy and alternative investments. And so there is a huge shift taking place, and the Sustainable Development Goals provide a framework for that.
Does ixo only address the goals defined by the UN, or can any organization that wants to make changing impact on the world qualify for using the ixo platform? So
ixo is, in true decentralized blockchain ideology sense, is a decentralized, non-central organization. So ixo doesn't dictate anything. What we do is we provide a set of tools and capabilities for anybody, whether you're a government or you're a private individual, to be able to set up a project in which you define the impacts that you want to have delivered, that you have a mechanism by which those impacts can be financed and evaluated and delivered. And ixo then enables that to be set up as a decentralized impact exchange. So it's a smart contract mechanism, and then provides the tools for the data to be collected in a way that it can go through from the service delivery level through an evaluation process to be validated, verified, evaluated, and then turned into verified impact data with a tokenized representation of that data and an associated proof of impact attestation by an evaluation service.
Would there be any projects that ixo would be able to refuse to work with, or would want to refuse to work with? Let's say if there's some organization that had some goals that were antithetical to I don't want to take one out of the top of my head because that's very interesting, because impact, in some people's minds, when you talk about impact, if they've just recently had a car crash, that's what will come to mind, and not all the positive impact. Right. And we to be honest, the protocol is agnostic. Anybody can use the protocol in the same way as anybody can use the Bitcoin blockchain to make a transaction and send value. The protocol can be used for anything. So you could say, this is a project which is about having an impact on children, and it's about
the service of delivering hand grenades, unfortunately. But okay, so that is all kind of within the realm of what is possible and outside of the direct control of the ixo.Foundation. But built into the protocol, because we use identifiers, there can be a requirement set, that the funding has to come from individuals who are identified, who may have a KYC credential, or whatever other identity or other sort of qualifying credential might be required. And so you could, for instance, raise funds from a crowd to fund a project, but put in place the requirement that you don't need to know the names of the people. You just need to know that they have a verifiable credential, that they are KYC compliant, and that credential has been issued by an acknowledged or recognized credentialing authority. So there are ways of managing this, but yeah, I mean, it does concern us, and we have had conversations about how we have a decentralized, non-controlled kind of protocol where there's no central control, but still try to avoid the misuse of the protocol.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that needs a bit of discussion. Do you guys kind of want to tell me a little bit about, I know that you want to spark the interest and get people, stoke people's interest, get people wanting to learn more. Where should people go to learn more about blockchain in general, about identity, about humanitarian aid, or any of these topics that you brought up today? Where can people go to learn more about this? Unless there's more I need to talk about ixo or anything that I missed.
To learn more about ixo, absolutely visit us on our website, ixo.network, and join our Telegram group. You can find us on Twitter at ixo_Foundation. And we're a team that, as Shaun had mentioned before, for us it's all about community and it's all about partnerships. This is as Shaun had mentioned, the goals that we're trying to tackle are enormous, and it's not something we plan or could ever do alone. And so we're really looking for people who want to get involved, who want to start projects, who want to support the technology and the vision that we have moving forward. And so I encourage everybody to get involved. And we've got some incredible partnerships already. We're partnered with we're funding from UNICEF Innovation Fund. We're partnered with Singularity University Ventures, as well as the Consensus Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition. And so, we would love to, anyone who's out there listening, who's feels passionate about what we're doing and about causes that they see in the world, to get in touch and let us know how you'd like to get involved.
All right. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I feel as if I could probably talk for a while and be constantly entertained. You two both have just like a wealth of knowledge about the world, about people, and about how best to help people. It's truly inspiring. So it's nice to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Really enjoyed it.
Are you looking for an easy way to buy Bitcoin or Ether on a safe, secure platform? Coinbase is the easiest place to buy and sell digital currencies. Sign up today as a friend of the Blockchain Show, and if you buy or sell $100 of Bitcoin or more, you'll earn $10 of free Bitcoin for yourself and $10 of Bitcoin to support this show. Join now using the link in this episode's show notes at theblockchainshow.com. To learn more, visit theblockchainshow.com.